Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. My hope is that through this podcast, you'll be able to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst. Well, this is episode number 28, and the topic of this episode is maintaining your mental. I came up with this because there's been some things going on in my life recently, and this has just been in my thoughts. It's something that I kind of had a realization around. So before I get into this too far, I do want to remind you of a episode I had earlier. It was episode 25. It was my big, very vulnerable podcast episode, and I talked about accelerated resolution therapy. So in this episode, I'm going to reference that therapy that I went through on some level, as well as talk about some other things that I've been working on. But before I do that, I want to give you this person's information. So the therapist that helped me with the accelerated resolution therapy is Amy Franson Burton. Her number is 801-661-0561. So there we go. If you would like to get in touch with Amy, she's amazing. I think the thing that I love most about Amy is that she makes me feel safe. I have known her for about, probably 5 years now. I think about 5 years. That's crazy. It's at least 4, but I think 5 years that I've known Amy. And from the moment I met her, she's one of those people that has just this joy and this happiness that makes you feel comfortable around them. There's probably something there that I could learn from that. But anyway, I wanted to get that out. So as I'm referencing it, if at some point you're like, this is for me, I need to do this, I would highly recommend it. Okay. Here's what's been happening. So as you probably know, if you listen to my podcast regularly, or if you somehow happen to be listening to this for the first time, a lot of my podcast episodes are about things that I'm either working on or things that I've learned in my past that a lot of the times they're on my mind for a reason. Just because you learned something a long time ago doesn't mean that it doesn't continue to come up in your life. So for whatever reason, certain things come into my mind, and that's why they come out in my podcast. And recently, if you've listened, there's been a number of episodes. I've talked about loving your human. So learning to look at ourselves in the third person, learning to look at ourselves in the first person, and looking at ourselves from these different perspectives in order to help us see different ways of viewing our life, different ways of viewing other people. So I talked about that. I talked about healing our past wounds. I've talked about this therapy session and how you can rewrite your negative beliefs and all these things. And so a lot of what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks has been implementing these things. And so there's two ideas that have been going through my head recently quite a bit. And I realize they're also connected. So I'm going to talk about one after the other. There is this audio that I absolutely love. It's called The Strangest Secret. It's by a man by the name of Earl Nightingale. I believe it was released in the 50s. So he's like one of the original personal development gurus. So if you know like Tony Robbins, this is like before Tony Robbins. There's a number of other people back there, but he's one of those people, Earl Nightingale. His voice is incredible. I could listen to Earl Nightingale talk forever. Same with Tony. I love Tony's voice. Both of those guys have just these powerful, deep voices that just, I don't know, there's something about them that just moves me. But in this little 30-minute audio, which, by the way, highly recommend that you listen to it. Just go search it on YouTube. I promise you'll find it. It's out there. He talks about how our mind is like a garden, and that as such, we decide what we're going to plant. We decide what we're going to weed and pull out. We decide what we're going to cultivate and water. And that thought has been on my mind for probably about a decade. I think the first time I ever heard that story was about 10, maybe even 11 years ago, that I listened to The Strangest Secret. And so this idea of managing my thoughts has been in my mind for quite some time. And what I've been doing is, with all these concepts that I've been going through lately, and with this therapy I've been going through, I've been recognizing how important it is for me to just constantly manage my thoughts by constantly reframing things over and over and over again, reminding myself of the decisions that I've made, etc. So, for instance, when I was in my ART session, one of the things I did is I let go of some past relationships that I was still holding on to. I don't know if everybody else works the same way I do. I don't know if everybody else's heart works the same way I do, but I have a hard time. I don't want to say a hard time. Once I love somebody, I don't just stop loving somebody. I might have something happen where I feel unsafe or I shut down emotionally, and I've had that happen in some of my relationships where I've become avoidant. If you know what an avoidant attachment is, I've had times where I become avoidant and I push people away. But once I reach a space where I feel safe, those emotions have come back. So I could name 4 or 5 people in my lifetime that I love those individuals. And I don't think I'll ever not love those individuals. But you can't just constantly hold on to people from your past that have moved on. And so during my therapy, I released some people. I let them go, and that's one of the things that I love about learning. There's a man by the name of Andrew Huberman. Love Andrew Huberman. He talks about things from a scientific perspective, and he talks about grief. I've talked about this in a number of my episodes about letting people go and about grief and things like that, but he talks about that when we are letting somebody go, either because they've died or they've chosen to leave our life or whatever it might be, that part of grieving is our mind remapping how we view that person. And part of that is accepting that they're no longer part of our lives. And so I made that decision during my ART therapy that I was going to let these individuals go. And so I've constantly watered that part of my mind. I've constantly, anytime those individuals come into my mind, I remind myself that I've let these people go, and just continue to reinforce that line of thinking. I've had those first and third perspectives that I've had, where I've had people that have handled situations with me in ways that I don't understand. So then I've looked at their actions from how I would have handled those situations if I was in their shoes. I've looked at it with curiosity and empathy and tried to understand their reality and understand their actions. And so I've had to remind myself of those things, where I've looked at that and said, okay, this is what I'm seeing right now. This is what I've decided around this. So I'm constantly reminding myself of those perspective shifts those ahas that I've had. And then I also talked, like I said, about taking care of my humans. So I've I've looked at things and I've said, okay, if I'm on social media, I look at it and I say, what is the purpose? Why am I here right now? Why am I on social media? Am I doing this just because I'm bored? Or because I'm trying to cope with an emotion? Or is there a legitimate purpose for this? I've had to constantly look at myself and say, am I taking care of my human right now? Am I doing the best thing for me? Another train of thought that I've had is, am I disappointing myself? I want to live my life in a way that I don't keep letting myself down. And believe it or not, that perspective has actually helped me because it feels softer to me. Instead of feeling like every moment of my life has to be lived at my highest level, I look at it and say, did I live my life today in a way that I disappointed myself and let myself down? Or did I live it in a way that I can be proud of? And I can be proud of myself if I took certain actions every day, even if I struggled at times. So I've had times where I'm trying to take care of my human, I'm trying to live my life at my highest level, and I did this for real estate, I did this for coaching, I did this for public speaking, and I look at it and I say, you know what, I'm proud of the things that I got done today. There's some moments in there where I'm not really proud of how I handled it, where I didn't live it at my highest level, but I didn't disappoint myself today. And so I've been doing all these things to just constantly manage my thoughts, manage my little garden, and weed out the thoughts that aren't serving me and water the things that are serving me. And so I've been doing all those things. One of the things I do is I have an audio that I've created for myself. I have these negative beliefs that I've struggled with throughout my life around abandonment and things like that. And I have been, each morning, each lunch, and each dinner, I listen to an audio that I've created for myself that counteracts those negative core beliefs, that remind myself that I've always been wanted. From the moment I was born, I've had two incredible parents that have prayed and cried for me from before they knew me. And I've had friends that have been with me throughout my entire life that have supported me and cared about me and loved me. And anyway, I look at all these different things and I realize I just constantly reframe my thoughts. I constantly am working to counteract those 30 plus years of negative beliefs and rewrite those things. So that's one thing that I've been doing, is I've been cultivating my mind. I've been watching my thoughts. I've been reframing and reminding myself of the decisions that I've made. The other thing I've done is when I was in my ART therapy session with Amy, she talked about one of the benefits of ART. I believe there's two main benefits of ART. One is to allow us to resolve emotion, and the other is to rewrite the way that we look at things from our past, rewrite situations. So I'm going to talk about the resolving emotions part. One of the things that Amy taught me is that emotions are like a wave. And that a lot of the times what happens is that wave starts to go, we cut it off before it has a chance to crest, crash, and resolve. And that ART is this safe place where you can go back, experience something that you have experienced in your past, or a representation of something that has happened to you in your past, and allow you to feel that entire wave of emotion. The thing that I took away from that is that too often we stop ourselves from feeling the full breadth of our emotions, the full course of our emotions. And that a healthy thing for us to do is to allow that emotion to go through its full cycle. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. And I've had times where I've had emotions coming into my body. And this is where those two concepts play out. Is on one hand, it's like I want to watch what I think and be careful about what I allow to stay in my mind. And on the other hand, I want to allow myself to heal those past experiences, feel those emotions, and allow them to resolve so that way I can move on. So then the question has come into my mind, how do I know when to do which? Because if a thought comes into my mind and that thought is bringing on a really intense emotion, should I allow myself to continue to dwell on that thought, feel that emotion, allow it to run its full course, or should I stop that thought because that thought is not serving me and let it go? So is this a weed that I need to pull, or is this something that I need to allow to blossom and go through its life cycle? And that has been a really interesting thing. I feel that it comes down to your intuition. For me, as I've started to feel emotions, and this isn't just in the last 2 weeks, I've recognized this over the last couple of years, that when I start to feel a really strong emotion, I'm like, is this something that I need to feel? Or is this something that is doing me a disservice? And it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know because if you're somebody that's dealt with depression, like I have, it can be really easy to dwell on the same thing over and over again to the point that it actually is harmful to you. It's not helpful to continue to process that same emotion over and over again. And so I've looked at it and I've just come to the point where I feel like I can feel the difference between something that feels healthy and something that feels unhealthy. Unhealthy tends to come from a place of self-criticism, inauthenticity, wounds. When I'm feeling a really strong emotion and it comes from the fact that I feel like, from that question that I've asked myself throughout my life is, why don't you want me? When I've had relationships that haven't worked out and I look at it and I say, is the reason I'm hurting so much right now is because on some level I'm asking myself, why didn't they want me? Or is the reason I'm hurting so much right now because I am letting this person go? Or appreciating the times that we had together? And that's true for non-relationship moments. I just have, relationships are such a big part of my core wounds that's the easiest way for me to talk about them. And so that's what I feel is a really important thing for you to take into your life, is to start looking at it and say, do I need to allow myself to feel this so that I can resolve this and work through it? Or is this something that is hurting me and I need to stop it? I was at this concert last night with my daughter, and while I was at this concert, this song came on. And this song has some serious emotional meaning to me because it was a song that was there during a really painful rejection in my life. And I felt myself start to get emotional, and I was trying to decide whether or not I should let myself feel into it. And more often than not lately, since I did ART, I've more often allowed myself to feel emotion. So I started to tear up and cry, and I had a man in front of me turn around and look at me, and I didn't care. I just allowed myself to feel that and to cry and work through it. And at the same time that I was feeling that emotion, I I felt gratitude in my heart for the beautiful, incredible moments that I had with this woman. And at the same time, I continued to remind myself that they had made their decision, they have moved on, I have released them, and they're not going to be part of my life. And just to appreciate that chapter in my life and to feel that love that's still in my heart for that person, but at the same time reinforce this belief that that is over and I don't need to continue to dwell on it. So I think it's like a combination of those two. It's release and appreciation. And what's crazy is if you listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast on grief, he talks about that. He talks about appreciating your experiences while releasing that individual. And I feel like I'm finally doing it now. I listened to that podcast 2 years ago, and I have been trying to live by the things that I learned in that podcast since then. I feel like I've finally figured out how to do it. So those are the things that I guess I want you to take away that I've been doing lately that I think can really help you is managing your thoughts, recognizing when you need to constantly reinforce or reframe, constantly reinforce a decision, constantly reinforce a positive belief, constantly counteract a negative belief. Like, you need to feed those things over and over and over again because you're retraining your mind. And at the same time, you need to recognize that I need to allow emotions. I need to allow myself to feel these, because repressing your emotions does not help you. Overriding your emotions does not help you. And I just think there's a skill that comes from learning how to understand when those emotions are serving you and when those emotions are not serving you. I guess the best thing I can say is just learn to tell, does it feel like it comes from a healthy place or an unhealthy place? And if it comes from an unhealthy place, that doesn't mean that it is not something to serve you. My friend Henry Amara likes to say emotions are indicators. And I really believe that. Like, if you feel this really strong emotion and you can tell it comes from an unhealthy place, figure out what that unhealthy place is. It's a wound or a trauma or a negative belief that you still need to go address. So go start addressing that wound. Go start addressing that negative belief and start counteracting it and working on it, because it's still, even though you may not be served by sitting there in that emotion in that specific instance, it doesn't mean that that emotion isn't telling you something. So that's kind of what's been on my thought lately. I hope some of those things are things that you can implement, that you can see where, I really need to reinforce things, I really need to rewrite things, and I really need to allow myself to feel things. I believe in you. I know you can do it. Until next week, remember that you are not alone.